Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's maybe morning. I don't know. Hi. Welcome to Betwixt the Books. We're doing a review today. We're recording this the day that this has to go up, and by that I mean we're recording this after 7 p.m. the day it has to go up. So if it seems like it was maybe rushed, I have no idea why. There's no reason for that. I definitely didn't finish the book 20 minutes ago. I don't know what you're talking about. But we're here today to talk about Iron Widow by Shiran J. Zhao.
Also, it is really hot in here because it's a heat wave, so I look like a tomato, and it's fine, guys, it's fine. Anyway, let's talk about this book. So this is a book that many of you may have already heard of, and that is because it has made the rounds on all of the book things, book talk, bookstagram. But just real quick for the skinny, if you don't already know, this is a book that for me, since I used to watch all of the Gundams on Cartoon Network, was absolutely fantastic when I heard of it. This is the book about Zetian. She lives in a futuristic sci-fi world inspired by Chinese mythology and legends and folklore. And in her world, there are people who... they're essentially Gundams, but that's not what they're called in this world anyway. Zoids? No, not that either. It's okay. But these are giant mechs that are piloted by a man who's the main pilot and a woman who is basically sacrificed every single time this mech goes to war, and there is a lot of wealth disparity, and Zetian's older sister was sold to one of these pilots to be his sacrifice, essentially, and she not happy with that. So this book is basically starting with her revenge story, headed off to avenge the death of her sister, by trying to kill the pilot who she was sacrificed to. Now, Zetian's plot is complicated by a wealthy son of, we will later find out is not necessarily a nobleman, but that's another story. And he decides to complicate her plot. His name is Yitze, and he is in love with her, and he says, "No, don't go." And she says, "But I must avenge my sister." And she leaves him presumably in the dust. Turns out it's a good thing he loves her. That will come back again later. So she goes off, and this is not a spoiler because it happens in the blurb. She does successfully kill the pilot who is responsible for the death of her sister. Hurrah! Except for female co-pilots are not supposed to be able to, murder the dude. That's just, the patriarchy is not happy. So they call Zetian an Iron Widow, partner her up with one of the most uncontrollable and yet powerful pilots out there, and send them off either to save the world or die. The people in power don't necessarily care which. A love triangle develops, secrets are unearthed, and there's a lot of pow pow pow. So it's a ride.
So, having just finished this like 20 minutes ago, again, keep that with a grain of salt because sometimes ratings fluctuate a little bit after you've been able to sit with a book. I'm sitting at about a 3.5 rating for this book, having just finished it, and we'll talk about some of the reasons for that. I feel pretty confident that it's going to stay there. I don't really think that it's going to go higher or lower than that, but just giving you the sort of caveat that I did just finish it, and sometimes you think of things later versus when you're like just out of reading the book. So, I enjoyed it. I am 100% down and willing to read the second book in the series. I totally feel like Gretchen and I could talk about it more in that place. I do also know that this is her debut, and it does have some markers of a debut book, so like, be aware that this is not the best YA book that we have ever read or reviewed, but it definitely shows a lot of potential, and there's some things that we really liked and some things that we really didn't like so much that kind of evened it out at a 3.5. Obviously, our reviews are always spoiler-free, but we are going to talk about some of the things that we took issue with later. I will say that it was really hard for me to get into the book. I had to like pick it up and put it down several times. Once it got past like the 100-page point, that got easier, and I was able to like get into the story a lot better and finish it in like 1.5 sittings. But that's obviously a negative. If you are trying to get into a book and the beginning is deterring you, I'm sure there's a lot of people who may DNF this book because of it.
So for my overall impression, I basically agree with everything Michaela just said. My rating is also about 3.5 to 4 stars, depending on the service, since Goodreads won't give us half-star ratings. This was a book I read in 2 very weird sittings. So I started it, like Michaela said, it was really hard to get into. I put it down. I'm not a super fan of sci-fi. And so then when I picked it back up, I was able to get into that much faster section, and then I just read it all the way to the end, because we'll talk about this more later, but this book is a ride. But I loved the concept, I loved the characters. It really did give me a lot of nostalgia from when I watched a lot of Gundam and Zoids, but there was a really kick-butt female pilot who takes no prisoners, almost literally. And there was an actual love triangle. Like, nothing bothers me more than books that were like, love triangle, but it's not actually. It's like this. This is an actual love triangle, and that's kind of sweet. It is only one perspective, just at the end, which I think is sad as you get into the book, because there could have definitely been more character development, but as Michaela said, I too would definitely read the next book in this series, because I have to know after that ending. Like, what? What?
All right. The first thing that we wanted to talk about, or rather I wanted to talk about, were the characters in this book. And as I was talking about this with some of my coworkers and describing some of these characters, the thing that I said was, like, these are some very stereotypical YA characters. We have sweet, precious, cinnamon bun, rich boy love interest, and we have gloomy, depressed, alcoholic, bad boy love interest. And we have the badass, snarky girl who doesn't take any shit protagonist. And, like, these are character archetypes that you have seen before. I will say there were not a lot of side characters, by the way. Like, there's this main trio and then a couple of other pilots and their wives / concubines / co-pilots. And, like, 1 or 2 other, like, men in power who kind of play roles in the book, but there weren't a lot of side characters, like, friendship-wise. But I feel like our core trio actually grew on me as we were reading the book, and they did have some interesting things. I think out of all of them, Zetian is obviously the most interesting, and she actually goes farther than most YA protagonists, like bloodthirsty, ambitious female characters have gone. At least in the experience that I have read, she is cutthroat, no hold barred, will go all the way, just badass.
Like Michaela just said, Zetian is amazing. I remember struggling through the first 100 pages, and the first 100 pages is how long it takes you to get to what the blurb on the flap tells you will happen, so this is not a spoiler. But when Zetian finally gets to murder the guy who murdered her sister, and she's like standing on his corpse and saying, "I am your nightmare," I was like, whoa, like, hang on. I feel like there are a lot of YA novels with assassin or revenge stories where they go after the person and they achieve their revenge or whatever, but, like, secretly they have a heart of gold, and, you know, they're doing everything for the right reasons. So even when they're really violent, like, you know, they're really sweet and innocent inside, and you're like, no, stop. Just be violent. Just be violent. That's okay. That's a fine character trait. And what I really appreciated about this book is that Zetian is violent and unapologetically so. There are several scenes in this book where I was like, oh my god, are they gonna go there? And they went there. So I will say that if you are not a fan of violence, this may not be your book. I know several tweens that would not like this book for that reason, but if you as a reader have always just been like, you know, these YA books like walk up to the edge and then they don't go there, this is the book that will make you go, yeah. And I really enjoyed it. I was entirely there for it because it just felt refreshing to allow this girl who has been abused by her family, abused by the system she lives in, to just take back her power by force. And I was just like, sign me up for this ride.
Gretchen mentioned this next thing in her overall impression, and we're gonna like whiplash away from violence into the love in this book, because we have an actual love triangle here, and that made me so happy. It was actually the single biggest selling point on this book when I heard about it, was that there's an actual love triangle where not only does the like female main character have two love interests, but those love interests have a relationship with each other, which is really power couple goals. Zetian says at one point that a triangle is the strongest shape, and like I loved it, and it was great. I feel like there's some people who are going to take offense to the fact that there is a poly relationship represented in a YA book, but I feel like it was done in a healthy way, less of like, debauched threesome sort of romance erotica, and more of a, we are three people who work better when all three of us are in a relationship together, and we each have, pros and cons, strengths and weaknesses that we bring to this relationship, and all are needed in all parts. It's not just like kind of thrown together like that. So yeah, one of my favorite parts of this book was all of their relationships. I did say to Gretchen, and she agreed to me when we were talking about what to say here, was that I wish that there was more space given to Ija and Shimon's relationship. Part of the reason, because this book is set solely in Zetian's perspective, we don't really get to see them interact with each other all that often. She notices it a couple of times and like makes a comment about it, but she's not like watching them interact when they are the only two people interacting with each other very often. And when she does notice it, it's after having been in her head, and she's just kind of like afterwards commenting like, did they like each other? And they do like each other. I just wish that we got to see their relationship grow more. And perhaps having multiple perspectives could have fixed that if we had that in this book. But because it's just Zetian's perspective, there's only so much that we can kind of know because of the way that she is as a character.
All right, guys. And now from one of the best aspects to, for me, the worst. Because that be how we do. Listen. So, this book, first of all, should not have needed a third of the book, basically, a little bit less, to get to all of the stuff that the blurb tells us is going to happen. I just kept chanting, just kill him, just kill him, just kill him, just kill him. And part of what that opening does, Michaela will talk about this, is set up the world building, and I understand that. But I really felt like it took almost a third of this book for the real story to start, and that was not great. Once it got into the story, I was like, oh, cool, fantastic. Things are moving at a really fast clip. Things are getting really interesting. There's way more character stuff going on. And then the ending happens. And I'm not going to spoil anything, but what I will say is that this book feels like the beginning is this long and the ending is this long. And because so much interesting stuff happens at the end, like, if I even tried, if this was a spoiler discussion and I was going to try to list to you everything that had happened, I would probably forget like 50% of it because so much happens in the ending. So much important stuff. It just really bugged me because I had forgiven the book for the beginning. You know, like I said, when she's standing on his corpse and going, I was like, fine, like totally here for everything else that is about to happen. And so then I felt like I had to rescind my forgiveness because I was like, you could have just given this space and just why? And especially with that ending. I need so much more information I don't have. And I understand there's another book coming. That is not what I mean. I feel like I was not very well grounded in that ending. There was a lot of stuff happening. And the pacing of this book, some of the pacing of the character arcs, it just didn't work for me. I think it's potentially one of its biggest marks of being a debut novel. And again, unfortunately for me, despite the fact that the story was really good, the fact that the pacing was like this really messed with the reading experience for me. Doesn't detract the fact that I want to read the next book, but I didn't like it.
I wanted to talk about the world building a little bit, and part of the reason why I think that this book is maybe going to lose some readers, and I said it in my overall review, which is that the beginning was very hard to get into. Gretchen talked about the pacing aspect of that, and I want to talk about the world building aspect of that. Part of the reason I think that section took so long was that there was so much telling and not showing of our world. It was Zatian telling about the giant mechs. It was Zatian telling us about how the girls get murdered all of the time. It was Zatian telling us all about the different types of chi that you can have, and the difference between yin and yang, and like you have all of these things that could have been peppered throughout the story in a more natural way that was being told to us all up front. And that's daunting to read. Like it pulls you out of the story, and it also it's just tiring because you're getting all of this information thrown at you all at once. And I think that's why both of us really struggled for that first 100 pages, aside from the fact that we were like, when are we going to get to the story? Because we know that all of this is going to happen. This is on the blurb. There was so much world building like shoved in here. And me as a reader and as a writer, or an editor rather, when I read something like this, I'm like, okay, as a writer, I totally understand needing to tell yourself this when you're writing the story so that you understand the world that you are living within. But then as an editor, I feel like we should come to it and say, okay, is this information necessary to understand the story? If not, take it away. If it is necessary to understand the story, how can we work this into our plot in a more organic fashion when it makes the most sense to talk about it? So, like, I totally understand talking about yin and yang when we go into the headspace of some of the characters. It's visualized as a yin and yang space there, and like talking about possibly the different types of creatures, like in a battle, like, oh, our mech is weak against this other monster because we are fire type and it is water type. Like, in that moment, like, you could totally talk about those different ways, but like, oh, our subtype is wood and that will help us, or something like that. Like, you don't need to tell me all of the different types all up front and like which one's weak to which one. Like, I'm not gonna remember it because you're just shouting it at me. And I feel like that was like maybe the weakest point of this whole thing. Like, we can forgive some weird pacing because we liked some other things, but when I know that this book is going to lose readers because of this issue of all of this front loading of world building on top of the issues with pacing, it struggles a little bit. And again, we want to read the second book. We both liked it, and like, there is a lot of promise here. And again, it's a debut. I totally understand like getting your footing as a writer and like learning to do these things as you go. So I just wanted to say that.
Again, it is always so much easier in these reviews to talk about things that we want to nitpick rather than things that we liked, because why would you want to sit here and watch an entire review where we go, we liked that, we liked that, we liked that? It's very boring. So even though we had these issues, we just do want to stress that we really did enjoy this book, and we do want to read the second one if you didn't already get that. But we had some questions, and I can't wait, and I know Michaela feels the same way, to read that next book and see how this book grows in the second book, because as the story grows, the author does as well, right? And that is sometimes a great thing with the next book in the series or the next book an author writes, because you can see that growth. And that is what I feel confident will happen, but we will have to wait until 2023 to find out. So I feel rather confident that Michaela and I will be back for you next year to let you know if we feel that that challenge has been met. But in the meantime, if you are interested in reading this book, we do recommend that you at least check it out from the library, give it a try. Just understand that beginning is going to be a little rough, but there is action ahead if you persevere. If it's not your thing, now you know. And that's really why we're here, I guess. Also to hang out, because Michaela's down there. Anyway, we're gonna go. We will see you guys next time for an arc review of a romance novel that's a third in a series. I wonder what it could be. See you then.